Trump and his current cabinet members consist of people that carries the bully mentality. Because you take my money and assistance, you are obligated to obey me. You have to appreciate me. Equality, dignity, respect? Nah, those values do not exist when you are weak. That's how Trump thinks. Not only I'm going to treat you harshly and demand obedience, you have to kneel down and lick my boots. You must feel honored to be bullied by me. Welcome everyone to another episode of Awakening Podcast. This is the video you guys been waiting for. How did the Chinese media respond to the Oval Office meltdown?
给我听什么他妈的叫惊喜？什么他妈的叫他妈的惊喜？
Things took a dramatic turn in the White House just as everyone thought Zelensky would sign the deal with the United States during last week's visit in the White House. A verbal argument broke out between Zelensky and Trump and also JD Vance and igniting the entire world, okay? Dwarfing even the Oscar Academy Award ceremony here in Los Angeles.
The one thing that I've gained having the privilege to come back here is to have some perspective. And no matter where you are in your career, no matter what you've accomplished, it can all go away. And I think what makes this night most special is the awareness of that.
Since the event took place on Friday last week in the Oval Office here in the US, which was past midnight in China, it took the Chinese social media the whole weekend to digest, and many geopolitical analysts comes out swinging this week. Let me start by showing you guys a short clip from Professor Shen Yi again and his analysis on this event. Take a look.
花了比较长的时间，才控制住自己的情绪啊！我觉得我们进行一场比较艰巨的录制，我要达成不可以笑场的这个挑战。
It took me a while to bring my own emotion down under control in order to make this video, because I'm going to challenge myself not to laugh during this recording. Today, we're going to talk about theatric and performance at its best. The live broadcast from the Oval Office between Zelensky and Trump. This is a textbook illustration of how to screw up a diplomatic negotiation. I don't think I need to spend too much time to explain the background of this meeting. Ukraine is engaged in a proxy war against Russia, in which Ukrainians are putting forward the manpower, while the Americans are mainly putting forward the money and weaponry. But suddenly, there's a change in leadership in the United States. The new leadership see the arrangement in Ukraine to be a lost cause and want to cash out while it still can. The United States is engaging in a bilateral negotiation with Russia to end this war. Of course, it is not going too well because Russia is winning on the battlefield, and it is demanding a lot of terms the United States find difficult to give. Trump wants to exit the Ukraine war with the United States' dignity intact, and as soon as possible, without feeling like a capitulation to the Russians. But this is also what makes the process more complicated. Trump wants the war to end in a win for the United States. Since it is basically hopeless now to get a win from Russia on the battlefield, it must get the win from the Ukrainians. Trump and his current cabinet consists of people. Trump and his current cabinet members consist of people that carries the bully mentality. Because you take my money and assistance, you are obligated to obey me. You have to appreciate me. Equality, dignity, respect? Nah, those values do not exist when you are weak. That's how Trump thinks. Not only I'm going to treat you harshly and demand obedience, you have to kneel down and lick my boots. You must feel honored to be bullied by me. Let me tell my audience straightforwardly that this is a twisted, unhealthy mentality. This is not how you conduct diplomacy. But we have to accept the reality that not just Trump, but his entire cabinet is filled with the same type of people. Trump's cabinet is filled with bootlicking and ass-kissing members that often make you feel disgusting. When it comes to foreign policy, Trump's team often express the notion that the entire world owes the United States, especially its allies. And because of that, Trump and the United States get the right to tell everyone else what to do. Imagine this kind of leadership in the White House. How can anyone expect the agreement US offered to Zelensky and Ukraine to be a fair one? In fact, the terms and agreement US offered to Ukraine must be an unfair one to begin with. Trump needs to use this opportunity to show the world that the US is still capable of bullying smaller countries into submission. This kind of mentality, this kind of thinking, is embedded within the US and Western political philosophy. You can't see them as the champion of democracy and righteousness. But in fact, you should see them as ex-pirates trying to change their career, but their pirate mentality is still there. The Ukrainians need to show their gratitude while being robbed by Trump and the US, and show appreciation during the process. From the point of view of Ukrainian, they have taken the wrong path. If there were a remedy for regret, if there's a time machine for Ukrainians to go back, they would surely take a different path. It's been the wrong path since 1991. If the Ukrainians are smart, if they have listened to Brzezinski, if they have listened to Kissinger, and later on John Mearsheimer, to let Ukraine to be a bridge between the East and the West, if the Ukrainians ever have that kind of wisdom, they won't have made so many wrong decisions. In fact, Ukrainians make a huge mistake. They overvalue righteousness and moral high ground as some kind of ultimate bargaining chip. Ukraine has turned itself into a bully that relentlessly and endlessly demands sympathy and support from its Western allies. I'm not trying to say that their moral value is wrong, but they fundamentally do not understand how the world works, especially when it comes to their so-called European and American allies. Zelensky is naive, acting if history started in February 2022, the day when the conflict begins, and nothing happened before that day matters. This fantasy delusional approach to history and politics, believing Ukraine has the right to ransom unlimited support from its allies. This is the kind of false understanding Zelensky carried when he entered the Oval Office. Zelensky expects that by kneeling in front of Trump, by kissing Trump's ass, by selling out his own country, he can at least receive some kind of compensation. And the only compensation Zelensky wants at this point is security guarantee. But Zelensky and the Ukrainians don't seem to understand that if this is something the West can offer and the Russians can accept, there won't be a war to begin with. When it comes to China-US tension going into the future, we can see that today's Donald Trump is not as mighty and not as powerful as he self-proclaims. In fact, he lacks the knowledge and ability to handle strategic planning and foreign policy at a high level. A basic requirement as the President of the United States of America. If Trump can't even handle Ukraine and bring it to submission, what does China have to fear? That's roughly a condensed version of Professor Shen's opinion from his video. Let's take a look at the top comments among many other videos who talk on this topic from the Chinese. This first one from EP.83. 3 years ago, when the Russia-Ukraine war had just begun, some mainland Chinese citizens predicted Ukraine's fate today and lament that Ukraine was being used as a pawn. At the time, many people in Taiwan mocked these mainland citizens as Russia fans. However, the truth is that there are few real Russia fans in mainland China. Many simply understand the harshness of reality. Hope people in Taiwan can remain calm and think realistically about what would be the least harmful choice for Taiwan. Well, that's my opinion. Since the beginning of this channel, many Europeans are just living literally in fantasy land. Okay, let's look at the second comment from XLGGZZH. Ukraine elected a comedian as president, while the US elected a president as a comedian. That's a
And she gets up, "Ah." And her parents are so proud. 19 years. She's almost here.
The next comment. This brother called Zelensky borrowed $350 billion from an illegal loan shark. He's referring to the United States here, okay? And only received $100 billion. Now, after 3 years, he needs to repay interest plus principal of a total of $500 billion, and there's land that worth $350 billion that needs to go into kind of like a collateral. So if you do the math here, Ukrainians borrow 100 billion and need to repay 850 billion. Okay, and during this negotiation of loan payment, the Ukraine leader was accused of not wearing a suit. This story teaches us not to borrow money from loan shark, the United States. From the way I see it going through the Chinese social media space, and of course, Chinese can correct me if I'm wrong, okay? It seems like majority of the Chinese audience are blaming Zelensky more than Trump. So the basic Chinese chain of thoughts goes like this, okay? NATO US is to be blamed for this war in Ukraine, not the Russians, and Ukrainians carry blame as well because they make the wrong decisions, as you see in these comments. Provoking wars and take advantage during and after war is a standard procedure for US strategy. Ukrainians should have known this, okay? And since Ukraine is a so-called democracy, they picked Zelensky, that's their own fault, all right? Trump is, yes, a bully, but he's also a businessman. And this is his business, and this is also kind of like the US business model. Ordinary Ukrainians are the biggest victim of this war, of course, but they could have seen this coming. So this is the Chinese opinion, which from the very first video of this channel, I kind of disagree. I want to emphasize that from the beginning of this channel, the very first video, I have said that, this is how Chinese think, majority of the Chinese think about this Ukraine war, but this is not how I see it, okay? The way I see it is always that I also think that this war is provoked by US and NATO intentionally, okay? But I do not believe Ukrainians have much choice in this. This is why I disagree with Professor Shen Yi's metaphor of going back in time using a time machine. Zelensky and Ukrainian would have taken a different path. This is, what Professor Shen Yi argues, right? I always see Zelensky as a puppet doing the bidding of foreign entities. If Zelensky took a different path, he would have never been maneuvered into the position to begin with. And someone else would have kind of taken his place and make the same decision to provoke Russia. Since the 2014 color revolution in Ukraine, the decision power is no longer in Ukrainians' hand. It's like the election that is ongoing in Romania now. Georgescu, who is a non-NATO candidate, will have a hard time winning the election because the ruling establishment, and often that is, foreign ruling establishment will always try to overturn the election result in order to move their candidate into power and do what they want. If Jajisco keep winning, they will just keep declaring it is Russia or China muddling with the election, and they will just keep canceling the election until they get the result they want. And this is also one reason I only believe democracy in principle, but in practice, with great power fighting over influence, it is very difficult for democracy to function properly, and majority of the population anywhere in the world, okay, is just not capable of understanding the complexity of geopolitics, especially with all those media propaganda machines, USAID running around. As you can see, I'm from Hong Kong, and even Hong Kong, a place like Hong Kong, which have very high standard of living, high salary and all that, even Hong Kong got color revolution. So it's hard for me to blame, normal Ukrainians to fall into the same trap. Now, Professor Shen Yi's comment on Trump is more or less on point from my point of view. This is why I said it's very difficult to end this war without the US taking a huge hit on international reputation. What Trump did is basically accelerating the transition into a multipolar world. Which brings us to a question I want to ask in this video to my audience. I was planning to make a separate video about potential Chinese peacekeeping force in Ukraine after some kind of agreement is reached. And I was planning this video before the Oval Office meltdown. I was saying that, okay, they're gonna sign it maybe, and after that we're thinking about how to wrap this whole thing down, maybe in months, and maybe the Chinese at the end might get involved. I don't know. But now is, of course, it will be still ongoing for a while, I guess, the negotiation. I know many people will say that it's a stupid idea for Chinese to deploy forces into Ukraine as peacekeeper, but let me make my point here first, okay? First of all war eventually come to an end, right? And judging by the current momentum, is going to end on Russia's term. Russia will be dictating the terms more or less. And there are usually two kind of scenario, okay, when the war ends. So first is that there will be a standoff between two armed forces, like what you are seeing in Korean Peninsula over the past few decades. So a standoff between Russia forces and on one side and Ukrainian forces and maybe NATO forces on the other side. But that's definitely something Russians do not want to see. The second scenario is there will be an agreement for, let's say, Ukrainian to demilitarize itself, accepting Russian terms, and both sides start to disengage from the contacting line, right? And that's when a peacekeeping force will be deployed. I believe back during the Suez Canal crisis in 1956, it was the Danish force representing the UN as a peacekeeper to replace the British and French combatant to oversee the disengagement. And since this war in Ukraine, so many NATO and European countries openly supported Ukraine, it is difficult for Russia to accept them as peacekeeping force. So in another video, Professor Chen here from China suggests that China can use this opportunity to deploy troops as peacekeepers, saying that this is a good opportunity for China to gain international recognition. And in the comment section under that video, the Chinese audience are outraged by Professor Chen's suggestion, and almost all of them are against this idea. Let me show you the comments here, okay? This first one. The further you stay from this matter, the better. There's no need to get involved in the trouble, okay? The second one, Chinese troops stationed in Ukraine, dragging China into the conflict between US, Russia, Ukraine. What kind of terrible idea is that? Why should China help the US solve its domestic problems? And do you think that's even possible? Instead, China should take this opportunity to resolve the Taiwan issue. That would be the most practical move. Also, this last one, this Professor Chen, he's referring to, okay, has been coming up with nothing but terrible ideas lately. Because in another video, he said that, China should arm Latin American countries with nuclear weapons or something. China must absolutely not send troops. Even reconstruction should be something for 10 or 8 years down the line. Right now, it is still too early to rebuild. There's no profit for business. One thing, if you read Chinese social media, is that the entire Chinese population is against Chinese military operation abroad. Because unlike here in the West, the propaganda media space often drum up wars and engagement around the world, right? For so-called righteous and democracy, freedom reasoning. So US, for example, makes excuses to justify military operation and deployment around the world for its imperial and colonial objectives. And the mainstream media is a tool to numb the public opinion regarding aggressive US action around the world. Chinese domestic propaganda don't really do that. So you don't have to worry about Chinese imperial military aggression, not at the moment. Only when, let's say, Chinese government media start to say similar things that the US say, there's a dictator somewhere in Africa, we need to send 1 million troops there to save the poor Africans. If China start to say those kind of things, then you have to, start to worry about Chinese imperialism, okay? Nevertheless, Chinese UN peacekeeper is active currently in a few countries, including Lebanon and South Sudan. And during the Israel military operation last several months, bombs were dropped by Israeli army, and it came very close to the Chinese peacekeeping force that were stationed there. And many of the soldiers there were recording their final goodbye video to their families and loved ones on social media in case, the unthinkable happened. Because, Israel at one point was just carpet bombing everything on its path, right? So I would say it's not unlikely that the Chinese government will participate in peacekeeping operation, even if, let's say, the mass majority of the public think it is a bad idea. But to the topic, to the question, what I'm asking here, should China deploy peacekeepers to Ukraine? It's a very difficult call, I assure you. My take is that, and please, I need feedback on this, okay? Here's my take, all right? The thing is that the condition need to be perfect in order for me to lean towards an arrangement like that. And after the dispute in the Oval Office, it's hard for me to see how the condition can, be favorable. What I consider good condition is the following, okay? First of all, of course, a peace agreement need to be reached between Russia, Ukraine, and whatever third party that's being involved. The plan, the peace, must be disengagement and also demilitarization of Ukraine. And Ukraine must be neutral afterward, okay? So definitely no peacekeepers from China if the parties decide to arm themselves to the teeth along the contact line and put Chinese in between. That's definitely a no-go. The Chinese being sent must be representing the United Nations, all right? Russians and Ukrainians both must favor Chinese troops being there, all right? Both. And they both need to work towards full disengagement and also normalization of relationship over the next few years. And if we have to take a decade or so, so be it. All right. So this is definitely not some kind of forever deployment. So I wonder if Ukrainians are comfortable with Chinese being there. So my Ukrainian friends can tell me about that. And the final demand here is that a third party need to pay for majority of the cost, the Chinese, UN's peacekeeping force. So it's either UN paying for it or someone else paying for it, just not China. China can pay a little bit, but definitely not the entire cost, because it will take a lot of money to contact lines long, and I think it will take a while as well. So to summarize my thought, on a scale of, let's say, 0 to 10, okay? 0 being hell no, and 10 being fuck yes, and 5 being, right in the middle, maybe not. If Ukrainians and Russians both want Chinese peacekeepers there, and if those conditions I mentioned are met, I would give it a 5 or 6. All right, that's the highest I would go. Because one of my biggest concern is that the Western establishment might reignite the war again very soon, even if Trump and Putin is able to figure out a deal. Because the next administration might turn everything around. And, judging by how many people in Eastern Europe really hate Russia, it is not difficult to sell them another excuse to fight another war against Russia. This has always been at the core of my conversation between me and my real-life friends in Europe. If they cannot find the wisdom to dissolve their own hatred against Russia or against, Putin regime, is that what they refer? It is very likely that more war will happen, and there are dark forces in Europe that often push towards more war and confrontation with Russia.
Якщо Трамп запропонує угоду, але з компромісами для Росії, там, наприклад, що ті території, які він окупував, він так і буде їх контролювати поки що, але взамін на це закінчиться війна або її активна фаза. Як би ви до цього поставились?
Як на мене, це було і під час АТО, що землі, які вони захопили, то залишились їм, то я не думаю, що Путін захоче віддавати назад землі, які вже кров'ю і потім захопили.
Скоріш за все так і буде, на нас буде тиснути зі всіх сторін, тому що всім хочеться вже, щоб не чути про нас. Ми вже всім набридли, за настроєм. Так, тому я думаю, в будь-якому випадку буде тиснути на нас і вимагати відмовитися від чогось, території собі.
Які компроміси, знаєте...
наприклад, контроль над тими територіями, які він захопив.
Я думаю, що воно все одно так і буде. Нічого в тому доброго. Знаєте, тут я завжди говорю, що в цій ситуації мені некоректно дуже багато, скажімо, некоректно оцінювати ситуацію, тому що я вже застарий воювати, а мій син замалий воювати. І всі мої думки з того приводу, знаєте, кожен каже, що ти нам розказуєш? Ти вже старий, син малий, тому мовчи і не говори багато.
Як ви би до цього поставились, але... Чому?
Тому що, ситуація така, що країна-агресор нападає, їй ще якісь преференції дають. Я вважаю, це несправедливо. Це дуже фруструє.
Тут дуже складно відповісти. Допустимо, Херсон, Запоріжжя і відверто їй шкода. А Донеччина, Луганщина, там вже просто нема до чого вертатися. Грубо кажучи, за ті території я не знаю, чи буде варта кров, а Херсонщина, Дніпро, Запоріжжя, там ще є наші люди, там ще не все перетворено в туху. Відверто.
Завдяки цьому закінчилась би активна фаза або загалом війна в Україні?
Я не можу на це відповісти, тому що може багато бути думок, і я утримуюсь від такого. Одним словом, хотілося б, щоб для нас воно було якось з найменшими такими втратами, найменшими такими негативними якимись. Тобто, щоб було щось погане, було найменше. Але Ну, важко дуже сказати, бо дуже багато різних думок, і отак кожен собі хоче, щоб було краще, щоб скоріше закінчилося, щоб наші хлопці скоріше прийшли, щоб вже тих смертей стільки не було, розумієте?
Мати контроль над тими територіями, які він окупував, але взамін на це закінчиться активна фаза війни або ж загалом закінчиться війна в Україні. Як ви до цього поставились?
Я думаю, що так воно і буде. Ну, тобто, хотілося б, звичайно, ну, я думаю, що більшість десь літа, я думаю, ну, от, якщо буде, мовна заморозка, то це буде заморозка тих подій, які вже є, вони, ну, Росія не відступить, Україна віджати свої території теж не може, тобто, ну, скоріше все, так воно і буде. Просто тут питання, як буде воно розвиватися далі, чи буде гірше, чи буде краще.
Чи, наприклад, ви погодились на таке, але завдяки цьому так би закінчилась активна фаза війни?
Ми всі прекрасно знаємо, що війна змінила зараз нас всіх і дуже сильно втомила. І тому, звичайно, що хотілося б хоча б на якомусь етапі, щоб воно заморозилося. Але ми не здамося.
Скажіть, будь ласка, а от якщо б була укладена угода, але з компромісом для Росії, наприклад, там контроль над тими територіями, які вона окупувала, чи було б для України це краще? Завдяки цьому
ми
війна б
ніколи не
закінчилась?
зможемо відбудувати то. Ніколи. Ми не будували, вон Львів сиплеться весь. Ми не будували то, що можна було, а зруйнована Україна не відбудує ніколи. Ніколи.